Good morning. All right, we are going to dive in this snowy Sunday morning on the story chapter 4. Before we do that, let's open with prayer. God of grace, we thank you for the many mercies you show us. We thank you for your continued faithfulness and remembering of your people. We pray that you would guide us today by your word as we might see your mighty power at work in the rescue of your people, Israel, from slavery in Egypt, as you set them free and bring them through the waters to new life. Guide us as your people in new life as well, knowing that you go with us. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so chapter 3 left off. The people were in Egypt. How'd they get there? Real quick. Famine. Joseph. Oh, so God uses Joseph, brings his family over from the land of Canaan and puts them where? So this side of the room, where do they get planted? What's that? Goshen. So some of the best land, right? Some of the best land in the land of the Nile. And so they grow. And so that's kind of what happens in between last time and this time as we go into chapter 4 of the story. That original generation that came over, they die out. Generations follow. There get to be more and more of these Israelites. And as in the story, right, in the chapter that we have, it's referring to the people as the Israelites. Why is that? Jacob's name was changed to Israel, right, which means wrestles with God, struggles with God. And so the children of Israel, the Israelites. But fun fact, that usually wasn't what the people outside of Israel referred to them as. It was because the people identified themselves to foreigners as the Hebrews, so the Hebrew nation, so that the Israel thing was more of like a family designation. So when the Egyptians had them, they were thought of the Hebrew nation or the Hebrew people. So the Hebrew people have been growing in this land of Egypt, in this good land. Conditions were favorable for them, and God blessed them. But they got to a point of there were so many of them that the Egyptian powers that be became concerned. So thinking about this in the context of history, because this is a historical record here. We have the people of Egypt who are in this time when we have kind of the scene changing for the Hebrews, as it were. For about a century or so, the Egyptians had been ruled by a foreign dynasty of the was it? I never remember the name. It was like the Hyksos or something like that. Hyksos. That's Hyksos. They were ruling over Egypt, and then we have this transition where there's now the new kingdom, is the period that's referred to in Egyptian history, the new kingdom. And it is this period of intense nationalism. So they're very wary of outside nations. They also are probably militarily some of the strongest that they've been. And that's the period that we have where this Pharaoh, we're not exactly sure which Pharaoh it is, decides, okay, we've got this ready-made labor force over here in these Hebrews, these outsiders. So guess what? They're our slaves now. We're going to put them to work on building things. I don't know specifically what all the Hebrews built, maybe temples, certainly storehouse cities, places where the Egyptians would stockpile food supplies, military supplies, things like that. And we have archaeological records of those things. I don't know if they were involved in building of any pyramids. I haven't really researched that part of it. But so yes, I guess if they were, you could say that aliens built the pyramids because they were not from Egypt. Some people following along with that, but not. Okay, fine. All right. So this is the period where the people now are being oppressed. They're being enslaved. They are calling out to God. How do they know who God is? Yes. How do you know how God is? Maybe because it's something it's been passed down, right? So from the generations that have come before, they have, as a people, they have remembered those who have gone before them. They remember Abraham and Isaac and Jacob / Israel, right? So they remember who God is. They remember the promises that God has made, and so he's continued that on through. But now they get to this point where um, it is a bad scene. They're calling out to God for rescue, but God um, is holding off, because we talked about this before, right? So God's timing, our timing, different things. But it gets to the point from the Pharaoh's, then maybe a new Pharaoh here sees the Hebrew nation, is like, all right, we got to take steps to cull this population so they're less of a threat. Because what happens when another nation comes against us and the Hebrews are like, hey, we're going to side with those guys and overthrow Pharaoh, overthrow the empire that's there in Egypt. So the first plan, what's Pharaoh's first plan? If we take a look at that, get the midwives, because the midwives are delivering the Hebrew babies. So if you take a look, page, where are we at there? Is it page 44? Yeah, page 44 at the top, right? So the midwives are faithful, though. They refuse to do this. And what they tell Pharaoh is, because Pharaoh calls and says, hey, midwives, you're not doing what I have commanded you to do. They come up with this thing in Exodus chapter, was it 1, later chapter 1, saying, well, these Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They're very vigorous. They give birth before we can even get there. Okay. So we don't have a chance to kill the baby boys before at birth, because, well, they're already delivered. Okay. So Pharaoh comes up with this other plan. All right, so every son that's born to the Hebrews, take it, throw it in the Nile River. So we're going to get rid of them with the waters of the Nile. They will be drowned. Because why the baby boys? They don't want any more men, right? Or reduce the number of men in the population, so they're going to be less of a threat to us. But we have this one particular woman who is who has a baby boy. She sees him and loves him, and she hides him. She hides him for about as long as she can, for maybe about 3 months or so, and then takes him and puts him in what is this thing that she builds? Well, this basket, right? So she takes it, takes the bulrushes, weaves them together, puts it the bitumen and pitch, and the word for this vessel, interestingly enough, is an ark. The same that's used for Moses, or for Noah. So Noah. So there's a connection there. So God is using this. So the little mini ark gets put out in the Nile River. Moses' sister goes to watch it, and a daughter of Pharaoh, and it's not necessarily that it was like the princess, like a singular daughter kind of thing, because Pharaoh had a few wives, and but part of the royal household there, but goes and sees this ark and has one of her maidens go and, hey, find out what this thing is. Goes, opens it up, and it's a baby. And she recognizes that it's one of the Hebrew babies, maybe because he was circumcised at 8 days old, if that was in accordance to what had been passed down as the people remembered. But she's, I'm going to take him to be my own. I'm going to take him into my house, and I'm going to raise him. So God has worked through Pharaoh's own household to bring up this one that's ultimately going to be used to deliver the Hebrew people that he is trying to oppress. Now, Moses' sister, Miriam, we hear her name later, she's been following, she's been looking, and she has the bravery, maybe the innocence, but to go and speak to Pharaoh's daughter to say, hey, how about I find one of the Hebrew women to nurse him for you, to take care of that. Oh, that's a great idea. And where does she take him? Back to mom. Now he is under the protection of the household of Pharaoh against Pharaoh. He is being raised, or is being nursed by his true mother, and then he is brought back later on to Pharaoh's household. So all these things have happened. And think about this. So Moses being raised in the household, so it may be in the context of the royal harem, but where there's maybe some other children as well. But he is raised in an environment and has opportunities and experiences that how many other Hebrew boys would have? Like Zippo, right? And so he is learning hieroglyphics. He's learning speech, writing, all these different things. He is being prepared. He's being groomed probably for service, either as an officer in the army, maybe in the civil service, something like this. He's being made ready for whatever this is. We don't have any details about what that is, but maybe he's learning Egyptian fighting styles and stuff too, martial arts, because that's a thing. So he's being prepared in those ways, and then he gets to be 40 years old. That's when the story picks up again, right? And he's out. He sees one of the Egyptians, one of these taskmasters, beating a Hebrew, which he apparently identifies with strong enough as a Hebrew to do what to the taskmaster? To kill him. After looking around to make sure nobody's paying attention, kills him, hides his body. And all's well and good until the next day when he sees two Hebrews arguing with each other. And what do they say? Like, who put you in charge of? You're going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? Uh-oh. Word's gotten out. And word got back to Pharaoh as well that this had happened. So Moses flees. Moses runs away from Egypt in haste to go back to the east, to go to the land of Midian, which is not exactly a metropolitan area compared to Egypt. But he goes out, and then he goes and it doesn't really cover that so much in the story here. But so as he goes back as he goes out to Midian, he goes to this well, and there's a figure that is known as a priest of Midian, got a couple names, Reuel, Jethro, and he has these daughters, and the daughters are taking care of the flocks, or came to water the flocks there at this well. And these guys come, these shepherds, try to drive the women away, but Moses does what? How does one guy drive off a whole bunch of shepherds? Well, with God's help, but maybe what has he learned in Egypt? Maybe some Egyptian martial arts, among other things, that he can do this significant thing, driving off these shepherds who probably were not inclined to go find another well, but he does. And the girls like, hey, cool, let's introduce you to Dad. And as it happens, that's Reuel, Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he invites him in. One thing leads to another. Moses gets married to one of the daughters of Porah, whose name means beauty, and they have a son, which is we have page 45 in the story. His name's Gershom, which means sojourner. So that Moses is sojourning in a foreign land, far away from Egypt, but God has given him a son, and he's there 40 years shepherding underneath Jethro. Lots happen in Egypt. The old Pharaoh dies. Other things are happening. The people of Israel are still crying out to God for rescue. And one day, as Moses is out with the flocks out in the area of let's say kind of west of where he's at in Midian, he sees this sight. So the two animated movies we had as homework last time, right? Prince of Egypt is the one about the Exodus, and the prequel is Joseph, King of Dreams, is the actual name. I had to go look it up. The prequel was not as good as the original, but anyway. So there's this epiphany, or if you've seen the classic, The 10 Commandments, with Chuck Heston, we have this divine epiphany, theophany, where God is appearing, the angel of the Lord, kind of equated with God, the presence of God there, in this bush which is on fire but does not burn up. And Moses is like, that's strange, and goes to investigate. But as he does, God speaks to him. He's to remove his sandals, right? Because what kind of ground is it? Holy ground. It is set apart. Why is it set apart? Because God is there. So the presence of God is what is making this ground holy. And then we go into this whole back and forth here, where God is calling Moses. God is giving him this assignment to go back to Egypt, because God says, Exodus chapter 3, verse 7, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up to a land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the bunch of hard names you don't want your lector to have to say on Sunday morning, especially if it's a kid. But hey, they did a great job this morning. The Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites. Oh wait, I added that one. But all these people that are currently dwelling in the land. So God is remembering his people, and he is going to deliver them. So Moses' reaction to God, the God of creation, coming to him, calling to him, and saying, "Yes, God, sure, I'm going to go." No, wait, what? Are you're talking to the guy behind me? Is that? No. Who am I? So in some regard, Moses is having due modesty here. Who am I that I would do this? Well, God would say, "You're the guy I'm calling." So that makes you the guy. And God is very patient with Moses here, as Moses kind of goes back and forth with this kind of thing, because he's like, well, all right, pay attention to this. So Exodus chapter 3, verse 12, God is speaking to Moses, and God says, but I will be with you. Again, the wills, right? Like we've heard in previous promises. And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Is that a promise that Moses is going to get to see right away? No. When's it going to happen? Well, after it's happened. Maybe not 40 years. This is closer to the Exodus, but bring back to this mountain. What is this mountain? Sinai. So the burning bush, God coming to Moses, is happening at the same mountain where God is going to be coming to Moses. On the flip side, bookends. So you will see that I am sending you when you come back here, because from God's perspective, this is going to happen. Moses might have these doubts, but here's the deal. Here's the sign. And here's the promise as well. So, but Moses comes back. All right, okay. So when these people you're sending me to, he's feeling a lot less affinity with them than when he killed the Egyptian taskmaster, apparently. When they ask and say, who is it that's sending? Who do I say? Because keep in mind, the Egyptian culture was not just around the Hebrew people, it had kind of pervaded. And it was a polytheistic culture. There was a big pantheon of Egyptian deities. And so the people of the Hebrew people in Egypt, they were accustomed to the worship of all these other gods and these temples and things like, calves made out of gold. Maybe that comes back later on. So they got to see all these things. And so, yeah, God is sending me to you. Well, which God is it that's sending me? So what does God say? So if you take a look in the story, or as it says in verse 14 of Exodus 3, God says to Moses, what? I am who I am. And the Hebrew there is the tetragrammaton, these letters. So Hebrew is consonants, not vowels. The vowels came along as the later on shown kind of by the pointing that we call it in the Hebrew text. from scholars later on to help people read it better. But so these 4 letters, there's YH, and in English we transliterate WH. There's no W in Hebrew, but so we would say Yahweh or Yahweh if there's no W. So Yahweh is kind of this other sound. So Yahweh in Hebrew is I am who I am, or it's kind of hard to translate, but the better sense is the being, doing, ising. It's an action thing. So this is who God is. This is God's name is related to his character because he is doing. He is always doing. He is always at work in some way. And he is the God who has created all things and continues to sustain all things. He is the God who made great promises to Abraham and Isaac and Israel. So when the people ask, this is who you say. And that's when we have in the Old Testament, usually here when it's Lord and it's in the small caps in our English translations, right? That's because that's the divine name. It's Yahweh. And we write it out that way. In Jewish culture, they would not speak the divine name or do that. So they would do a substitution. So they would take Yahweh, those consonants, right? And then they add the vowels for the Hebrew word Adonai, right? The high one. And you combine those two. So you take the vowels from this, stick it on the consonants for the divine name, and you get Jehovah. So Jehovah is not a name that's actually in the Bible. That's this combination of these two things here. So if you ever wonder what was this Jehovah name, well, it's Yahweh combined with the consonants for Adonai. So God has given Moses the name. I am sending you. And know that all this is going to happen. The king, Pharaoh, he's not going to let the people go unless he is compelled to do so, unless he is struck by a mighty hand. And God says, I'm going to stretch out my hand. I'm going to do these things. So God has the plan in place. And you're going to go out. And then if you take a look down in verse 22, each woman asking of her neighbor, any woman who lives in her house, for silver, for gold jewelry, for clothing. And then heap up your sons and daughters as they come out, because that way you are going to plunder the Egyptians. So if you think about it this way, as we're coming to I probably need to speed things up here. There's lots going on, but this is going to connect. Moses is still like, you know what? Just like me talking, I don't think they're not gonna believe it. They're not gonna say that Yahweh appeared to you. God's like, okay, so here's your deal. Take the staff, throw it down, bam. It's going to be a snake. And then you pick it up, staff again. Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Stick your hand in your robe and pull it out. Oh, it's got leprosy now. That's not cool. Stick it back in. Bam, it's okay. Well, that's pretty neat. I mean, these are pretty amazing things that God is giving to Moses. But if they don't believe the first thing, if they don't believe the second thing, if they're not listening to your voice, take water from the Nile, pour it out on ground, and it's going to become blood. Wow. Okay. Well, that's a whole assortment of things. But Moses is still like, yeah, God, I'm not the best talker. So I'm slow to speech. And maybe Moses had a speech impediment. We don't know. But God's like, all right, here's the deal, Moses. Patience is growing thin. I'm going to send your brother Aaron, who's a few years older than you. He's going to be your kind of spokesperson. So Moses is the connection with God. Aaron is going to be the spokesperson. So we see in the future, as we go out and see all these things happening, Aaron and Moses are usually both there together, Aaron being the one who speaks. And God sends, and Moses is like, okay, all right. So he goes. So he takes his wife, his son with him. And as they go, there's this just to really touch on this, it's kind of this thing that we don't really see much of. But if you go to verse 34 of chapter 4, or verse 24, sorry. At a lodging place on the way, so kind of this campsite area for stopovers, the Lord met Moses and sought to put him to death. What? That's weird. So Zipporah, his wife, takes a flint and circumcises their son, touches Moses' feet with it, and says, surely you're a bridegroom of blood to me. So God let Moses alone. It was then that she said, a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. And so, Bob, what were you about to say? Moses had not circumcised his son. And what was the big deal about circumcision? Remembering back from Abraham, it's the mark, it's the sign of the covenant, right? So the God who's sending him, Yahweh, is the God of the covenant. And for Moses' own son to not be marked with the covenant, that would be a problem. So all these things go. Moses meets Aaron. They go talk to Pharaoh. It does not go well with the first conversation, because Moses is like, hey, send my people out. So we're going to go worship. We're going to worship God out in the wilderness, and we'll come back. And Pharaoh's like, oh, who's this Yahweh? Who's this God that I should recognize? And we got plenty of gods. Tell you what, how about instead of sending you out to go worship, how about we make your work harder? And you make the same number of bricks, still have to meet quota, but we're not giving you straw to make the bricks together. So the people, the Hebrew people, what's their reaction? Thanks, Moses. Thanks, you're great, buddy. You just made things worse for us. And so God sends these plagues or judgments. An important thing to remember, these are not arbitrary. The plagues that God sends, or these judgments, they are, what's that? Yes. So each of the plagues ties back to one or more of the Egyptian pantheon. And so they're judgments against these gods, showing who is really God. So if you go through it, just real quick, the Nile turning to blood, and whether it was actual blood or becoming blood colored, like an algae could turn it red and have like a blood tide. That is very much something that God can be working through the mechanisms of nature to do this. Because the result is the fish die, they stink. And when the fish die and stink, well, then the frogs, these little Nile frogs that are all over the place, are driven out from the Nile and then go out into all the houses. The fish that are rotting and dying, and the other things that are dying, they breed flies and gnats, maybe mosquitoes, maggots, all these pleasant kind of tiny little things. Flies come as well. They spread disease, probably first to the livestock, then maybe to the people. So as these diseases are spreading, then God steps it up with the hail that comes down, not just like little hail, but big hail, which crushes the earlier crops. Not all the crops had grown to the point of germination, but this first plague comes, wipes out that. But here in that plague of hail, God does provide the warning. And some of the Egyptians, by this point, they've taken notice, and they fear Moses and the God that he represents. And so the word gets out. Some of the Egyptians, they're like, hey, you know what? They say hail's coming. Let's bring in all of our workers and livestock so they're sheltered. But those that don't, they're killed. The livestock, the workers that are out in the fields when this giant hail comes. Then there's locusts that are driven in by these winds from the east that kill the rest of the crops and eat up the rest of the crops that the hail didn't destroy. Then there's darkness, which could either be the supernatural darkness, because we do hear that while there's darkness across the entire land, who has light in their homes? The Hebrews. The children of Israel have light in their homes. I mean, it could be one of the giant dust storms that could come and just blot out light from the sky. But it's entirely possible it's another miraculous thing there. And then, so in all these things, the plague with the blood against the Nile, the gods of the Nile, Isis, Osiris, which was, if you think about it this way, what was the lifeblood of Egypt? The Nile River. And hey, now all of a sudden it is blood, or it has this appearance of blood, and it can't sustain. So the people have to dig off the sides to get fresh water. So let's say it is this algae, but the sand is filtering it, so they have to dig to get water to be able to sustain there. The frogs, the goddess of birth in Egypt, represented by a frog head. So the frogs coming. Set, the god of the desert, with the plagues of the gnats or mosquitoes and the tiny little insects, the flies. One of the Egyptian gods possibly represented by a fly. The livestock. There's a goddess with a cow head, a god with a bull head. Those are struck down. These false gods are not able to protect them. The boils. There's goddess of disease, pestilence, medicine. All those. Who's really God? Not these. The hail, the sky goddess, god of storms. They have no power to stop it. Osiris, the god of crops and fertility there. The locusts come, the darkness. Who's one of the most powerful gods in the Egyptian pantheon? The sun god, Ra, right? Darkness. Where's your sun now? And then finally, this great and awe-inspiring thing of the Passover and the death of the firstborn. So God commends his people. He tells them to get ready. And what are they supposed to do to get ready? Well, before the blood, get dressed, get ready for travel. All right, get your running shoes on. All right, you're going to have a meal. Hit up the neighbors, because ask them for gold, for silver, for clothing. Because hey, that sounds like what God told Moses way back. So this is about Moses is at this point roughly 80 some years old, and go ask up your neighbors for that. But then you're also going to have a meal. You're going to have a meal with what? A lamb. Well, so you're going to have bread, but it's going to be unleavened, because the leaven, the yeast, takes time to rise. You ain't going to have time. You're going to have unleavened bread. So no yeast. You have that bread, some flat bread, some nice naan, something, right? You have that. You're going to have these bitter herbs. And then what's the main course? Lamb. That you're going to sous vide boil, right? No, roast it. Because what is roasting? It's the quickest way to get it done. You're going to roast the lamb. You're going to have it ready, because you're not going to have time to do other preparations. You're going to roast it. You're going to, and if you don't have a lamb, it could also be a goat, something like that. But it still needs to be spotless, without blemish, without any defect, a year old. What if your neighbor is not big enough to have a lamb or something like that? You bring them in. And is this just the Hebrews? No. If there are those in Egypt by this point are like, Yahweh's the real deal, they're joining them for this meal as well. And so they're having this meal, and before you have this meal, you do what with the blood of the lamb? Take it and put it over the doorposts and the lintel, and mark it, because that's going to be the sign. That's the do not enter, because God is going to send his angel, his destroyer, over the land of Egypt, and the firstborn of all of Egypt, including the livestock, are going to die unless they are under the mark of the blood. And it happens just the way God says. So the people of Israel are safe under the blood of the Lamb. The people of Egypt, including Pharaoh himself, Pharaoh's own firstborn son, dies. Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron, get out. And so they go. Don't have to tell us twice. And the rest of the Egyptians, here, take the silver, take the gold, because if you stay, what's going to happen? We're all going to die. Go. But here's the neat thing, this is one of those things maybe we miss a little bit too. Chapter 12, verse 32, Pharaoh is speaking to Moses and Aaron, and said, take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. So it finally sunk in. Well, the people of Israel they depart, and as they depart, God is leading them by this pillar of cloud and pillar of fire, so that they can see this clear sign that God is leading them on the way they would go. It's going to continue to be that sign that's leading them. But they get to the point, and God gives this weird instruction. It's like, all right, so you're going great, because on the way to the promised land, but you know what? We're going to take a little detour, little scenic route, do a little loop-de-loop here. And that appears to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians, who apparently are having scouts watch them where they're going, that they're lost. They don't know where they're going. Pharaoh comes to his senses. It's like, you know what? That's our labor force. I don't know. Bring them back. The chariots are one of the greatest weapons in the Egyptian arsenal because they gave you mobility. They gave you firepower in the ancient world. It's like, okay, ready the chariots, a big force of chariots, and we're going to go and we're going to get them. So they go out to pursue them, and then the people are now at the Red Sea or Sea of Reeds, depending on the translation of this, and probably like these salt marshes and things, and they get to this point, and they can't go any further because, well, God's led them to this point. There's this sea in front of them. Sorry, all right, so we're gonna take a pause here, and Pharaoh and his army are catching up, and as they see, you maybe see the dust coming up as the sun is going down, and then you hear the sound of these horses and these chariots. And what do God's people do? They freak out. They are afraid. They blame Moses. Hey, Moses, great job again, because now the Egyptians are going to kill us. Wouldn't it be better if we were just slaves in Egypt? And Moses goes to God, right? Moses is like, hey, God, what's the deal? Egyptians, they're over here. God tells Moses, tell the people this: I'm going to fight for you. Be still. All y'all don't do anything. Just wait and watch. See what happens. And Moses, take that staff of yours, that staff that you had all this time, and stretch it out over the sea. See what happens. Moses does, and the sea splits. Wall of water, left and right. And the people go through. They go through on the ground to the other side of the sea. They all make it across. Oh, in the meantime, what's the deal with the pillar of cloud and fire? It's back separating them, keeping the Egyptians away. So all throughout the night, Egyptians can't get through. They can't get to them. But then God lifts the pillar. The Egyptians are like, there they are. Let's go get them. And they go in like, hey, Pharaoh, there's this water thing going on. Go get them. And so they go. The army goes into the sea in pursuit. The Israelites are crossing the other side. Hey, Moses, stretch out your staff again. Moses does. And the waters close over. So there's this recurring theme of water, isn't there? Where Pharaoh is going to get rid of the Egyptian power, or the Israelite power, through the waters of the Nile. Drown them, right? Get rid of the firstborn. God, as we have seen, views who is his firstborn? The children of Israel. He refers to them as his firstborn, and he saves his firstborn and then vanquishes the power of Egypt through what? Water, and drowns them, defeating in one act the most powerful military force of the ancient world, and saving his people, bringing them out. Now, the story, chapter 4, continues, right? We don't have much time left here, but as the people are going, they're journeying along, being led by the pillar of cloud and fire. Things are great until they start getting hangry, right? We've run out of food. There's not a lot of water in this wilderness where we're going, but God provides. God provides water from a rock and provides sustenance through this miraculous thing of the quail to provide meat for the people, and manna, this flaky thing that they can feed themselves with. And he continues to do that with the manna throughout their journey. He continues to provide for his people, but they keep forgetting. And this is kind of, if you've already in worship today, you kind of know the theme, but there's this continuing forgetting. And whenever they're forgetting, they're complaining, they're grumbling against Moses, against Aaron. It was so much better back in Egypt. Yes, we were slaves, but we had food, we had places to live. But it's continuing, like remembering. They are forgetting how bad it was, and they're just remembering some of the highlights because they all that they can think about right now is how it's not what they want it to be. But still, and as Diane says, we never whine and complain. But there's the thing is that lest we think too harshly of the Hebrews, it's like they're not really any different from us. Has any ever been in a long car trip? I'm not even talking about days, right? Minutes, like, yeah, it's like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. That's not just the kids in the back seat, right? Are we there yet? Put yourself in Moses' shoes with 40 years of are we there yet? So we'll hear more about that in the journey as we pick up chapter 5 next week. But so God has done all these things and worked in all these ways because he's continuing. His upper story is continuing. He's fulfilling his promise. He is giving the people these great gifts as they are going to the next stop. And the next stop is what? What was the promise back of the burning bush? This will be my sign that you will know that I am sending you when you come back and serve me at this mountain at Sinai. So that's their next stop. And this is an important thing too, as we're connecting into next week. Think about this. Are they going to Sinai to become God's people? They are God's people. God already remembered them. He called them. He's keeping his promise. Again, that's a theme we see continuing to run through the story. God is keeping his promise. He brought them out from slavery. He brought them through the waters at the Red Sea into new life. And how are we like the Hebrew people? God brings us out from slavery. Not to Egypt, but from what? From sin, from death, from self, through the waters, not the Red Sea, but what? Baptism, into new life. They're already his people. You're already his people. And when we get to next week at Sinai and what's happening there, it's just, it's expanding. Okay, this is what this means. This is what this is to be my people. Okay, cool. Everybody looking forward to that? Rock and roll. Hopefully there'll be a little bit less snow next week, but we'll see. God bless you. Bless your journeys. Maybe you don't need a pillar of cloud and fire, but GPS works pretty good. God guard you and we'll see you next time.